Hello and welcome back, and today I want to kickstart a series of videos where I take a closer look at the latest generation of SSDs. I'm of course talking about those new M2 SSDs that take advantage of PCIe 4.0. A potential bandwidth of over 8,000 megabytes per second is possible, and we're seeing more and more of these SSD manufacturers start to introduce their latest series of devices that can break into the 7,000 megabytes and more. And although they can't fully saturate that whole connection yet, I think they're getting closer and closer. Previous generations of M2 SSDs that arrived in both PCIe 3.0 at 3x4 and the first generation of PCIe 4x4 SSDs, they never fully saturated either of those bandwidth connections, and thanks to modern generation controllers starting to arrive on the market, we are starting to see some of these SSDs really reach blistering speeds, but not only speeds, but endurance levels and lifespans and how long they will last within your systems, both individually and in groups, surpassing many of our expectations from as little as a year ago. So, this first video, as the title card suggests, we are comparing the Firecuda 530 from Seagate against the WD Black SN850. Now, most of these videos are going to be focusing on that Seagate Firecuda. Why do you ask? Simply because currently it is the score to beat. If you look at all the latest generations from out there, from Brent, from MSI, from Samsung, even ADATA, all of these SSDs, if you pile them all up and look at their specifications back and forth, currently the score to beat is that Firecuda. So we'll be comparing each of the current generation of top tier PCIe 4 SSDs against that Firecuda to see which ones stand and which ones fall. And in this video, the reason I've picked the WD Black SN850 is it was one of the earliest SSDs to enter the market midway through 2020 to harness a lot of the performance of PCIe 4. And although the Seagate Firecuda has only been formally released, and even availability isn't really there right now, it's had WD Black's SN850 has had somewhere between 2/3 of a year and half a year, depending on the region you're in, to saturate in the market and really get out there. So right now that has affected a lot of the price point. It's affected the availability despite those semiconductor shortages, despite things like Chia knocking the market around, and of course the trade war that happened part of the way through 2019-2020, and of course the pandemic. It has led to availability and pricing going nuts. So let's compare these two SSDs. Let's talk about what their strengths and weaknesses are. But before we go any further, let's talk about what they've got in common, because whether you go for either one of these two SSDs from Seagate or WD, it has to be said that you are getting quite a damn fine SSD for your money. For example, both of them take advantage, of course, of PCIe Gen 4x4 bandwidth. PCIe Gen 4 being 2,000 megabytes per second throughput on that lane, and times 4, you times that number by 4, 8,000 megabytes per second. That is purely the bandwidth, but it's how the SSDs that are built that try to occupy that bandwidth. Again, think of pipes, think of water. The other thing they've got in common is they both take advantage of the latest revision of NVMe 1.4. Now, that's very, very important. Not only because it means that the latest optimizations and improvements in NVMe SSD throughput and Iops and more have been applied here, but to get the very most out of these SSDs, you've got to make sure that your host device, your PC, your console, your whatever, can take advantage of 1.4. There is backwards compatibility, and of course, if you are running a system at 1.3 or 1.3C, something like that, you're still going to get great performance, but you're not going to get the peakest of the peak out of these SSDs of what they're capable of, so do bear that in mind. They also both take advantage of 3D TLC NAND, so which is great, which means more layers to play with, and it also enhances performance and even assists durability, which is always impressive, which I know we talked about a lot on the channel before when we're seeing these larger capacities. Some SSD vendors that become more affordable tend to fall into that QLC NAND there, the horrible one that's got terrible performance, or I say terrible, relative terrible performance, relative terrible durability. That is not something here. It is 3D TLC NAND. Although it's worth highlighting that the way they've gone with the layers will massively impact things. with the Firecuda arriving with 176 layer NAND and the WD Black arriving with 96 layer NAND. That will play out throughout this video as we talk about performance, Iops, durability and more, and you will see how that really does make an impact in a number of ways. They've both, of course, got 5 years of manufacturer's warranty, which is damn standard. If you're buying an SSD in 2021 with less than 5 years warranty, send it back. Seriously, send it back. 5 years or bust. It's worth highlighting with the Seagate, of course, you get that rescue recovery service. And again, I know a number of you may feel you're never going to take advantage of that data recovery services. Maybe you haven't before, maybe you never will since. But I think it's good to have it there, whether you are a gamer that's streaming live and you've got recordings that you just can't afford to lose in the event of a power surge on your machine or water or anything like that, or just an accidental deletion or corruption. Maybe your encoding software, your OBS or something fails, or if you're a video editor that's running a single scratch SSD for your editing there on the side, or for whatever you do, there may be core temp files in there that you need to retrieve, and having 3 years of data recovery service is pretty good. And it's still weird that in 2021 only Seagate offer this. Either they dominate the market on this and they bought up enough companies, or no one else sees the value of this, because we've talked about it a lot in the past. So the only other thing to really talk about is controllers. They both use sophisticated controllers, but both of them have very different ones, with the Seagate taking advantage of that popular Phison E18, the E18PS 5018. That controller is pretty much the gold standard. It has been utilised in a number of other different vendors as well. The Sabrent take advantage of it. I believe the MSI SSD with its awful name, Spatium, whatever that is, has that as well. But the WD Black, much like Samsung, they have in-house R&D and in-house manufacture for a lot of their SSD tech, and they're incredibly proud of it, and they should be as well. They take advantage of the Black G2 controller, which, although very, very, very good, it has to be said, that is starting to show the tiniest element of age, even 3/4 a year after we've seen it mass produced in a number of different drives. And given that WD Black moved up from the SN750, I think they came before, it might be the 760, this newer generation Black drive here is already starting to look like it may need an upgrade later on. Not for everyone, which is something I will cover in the video, because it's still a damn fine drive, but it's worth highlighting that one of the subjects we're going to have to tackle throughout this video is that WD Black released their drive much earlier than Firecuda. Same thing that we're going to discuss in the Samsung 980 video, the 980 Pro, and the benefits and indeed the curses that come off the back of that. But let's talk about distinctions between them. If you are someone that's looking to buy just a single disk, maybe you're going to use it, a little bit of caching, maybe a single drive for your editing, maybe a tiny little upgrade for your gaming, and you only run 2 or 3 games at any given time, so you're not looking for a massive amount of storage, you're looking for a single drive, then I've got to tell you, right now, the WD Black SN850 is great price. It's some great pricing you see out there. It's available in 500 gig, 1 TB and 2 TB, and it is around 30 to around 40, maybe even $49 in some cases, because prices do fluctuate. Cheaper than the Seagate Firecuda 530 drives there. Now, I mentioned about flexibility there. As mentioned earlier in the video, you've got to factor in semiconductor shortages, you've got to factor in the pandemic, you've got to factor in pain in the arse as it is / was with any luck. We've got to say that the pricing on WD Black SN850s, because they've been around a lot longer and they're more all over the market, very hard to get a pinpoint. You can get some great deals there, so we're going to have to be a little bit flexible about the price difference between them, but still arguably, no matter where you look, the SN850 series is definitely the lower price of the two. But price doesn't always necessarily translate into value, and I think it's very important that what you get for your money is prioritized over that of just simply how much you are paying. In terms of capacity, you may already see from the notes on the screen that the drives from the Firecuda series, they're available in up to 4 TB, which is a big deal. If you're going to buy one drive, moving slightly away from video editors and moving slightly away from casual gamers, if we go to online streamers, professional content creators, or those that deal with 8K or even the on-the-cusp PS5 internal storage upgrades, these are ones where the bigger storage capacity is definitely going to be more desirable. And the idea that going for a 4 TB drive, despite its horrendous price tag, is going to be very, very appealing to many people. And do bear in mind that that price tag, as high as it is, you've got to work it out per terabyte or per gigabyte if you must. And it ultimately comes down to the price difference between the 500, 1 TB, 2 TB and 4 TB. Price per gigabyte, price per terabyte is actually quite comparable. So it's only that high because the capacity is that high. And although the WD Black SN850 is definitely the better price out of the two of them, later on I'm going to explain why I think the 530 is actually better value, more than just the additional layers that we talked about, that controller and the rescue service included. Where does all that impact? Next, we're going to talk about read and write performance. Let's face it, it is bread and butter. It is the language we all speak. Later on, I'm going to talk about data writes, I'm going to talk about Iops, and we've talked about all that other stuff. But read and write, that is very much our meat and potatoes. It's what we all understand. And it has to be said that on the whole, if we look at it as a large scale, the Firecudas do outperform the SN850s. Not in every case, it has to be said, and there is parity and comparable details between them. Certainly the performance on the 500 gig model is identical in terms of read, which is going to be incredibly important once again to gamers, semi-professional gamers out there that aren't going to be recording or rendering or broadcasting in real time. And if you're just going to be accessing assets, the read speed on that 500 gig is fantastic on both of them, but the write speed on the 500 gig SN850 is superior. And given that that 500 gig is already a better price there, I think a lot of low-level gamers, you know, casual gamers, and again, those that are going to be editing smaller projects that they can then archive or migrate onto another area of storage are going to be quite pleased to see that. But after the 500 gig, we do see on the whole that the Firecuda 530 just provides better read and better write throughout. And the SN850 sticks the landing at that 700 megabytes per second read, but with the write there only really dipping out of 5,000 megabytes per second, whereas the write on the 530 series gets closer and closer to that 700, with 6,900 and 6,000 reported on those different capacities. So again, in terms of traditional read and write, and this is sequential read and write I might add, you've got to give that score to the 530 on the whole. Now, moving away from that, we can go to Iops. Input-output operations per second. This is ultimately comparable to latency. It's how responsive this drive's going to be, and if you are using a drive like this for caching, or you're doing lots of render farm type stuff, or you're running huge data center operations where these drives are going to be used in bulk or within U2 or U3 adapters, then I would say straight away that the Firecuda series wins on points. And again, the Firecuda 530 winning on points is a very marginal victory, it has to be said here, because between the two of them, they both crack the 1 million the 1 million Iops figure there on both read and write eventually. But it has to be said that only the Firecuda 530 cracks 1 mil on both. In the start of it, at that 500 gig model, the WD Black SN850, that did seem to take the lead at 1 mil over 680, but again, it kind of holds the 1 mil read random Iops, but again, the rest less so. And I think, again, on points, the Seagate 550 takes the lead there. But again, the minute you are introducing more than one, maybe two of these SSDs in unison, it becomes almost immaterial, because then you'll be bottlenecked by the core processor and architecture of the device you've got them in. So whether you're installing these on a high-end PCIe adapter card, which will have to be PCIe 4, or a large rig with multiple M2 slots where it can take advantage of these drives, maybe in caching or live storage or editing, Iops will end up bottlenecking on the overall system you're using. So you can largely ignore it, if I'm honest, in terms of the Iops there. But again, Firecuda takes this one on the points, which leads us neatly into probably what I think is one of the most key areas of SSD technology, that although SSDs have been around now for more than a decade, probably 15, 16 years, if I think back over the years of my own time in data storage, I think it's only been in the last couple of years that we've seen durability, endurance, and lifespan of these SSDs being taken a great deal more seriously, mostly because the price point of a lot of SSDs and the NAND that were being utilized were being led to endurance being still pretty good. Everyone knows that SSDs, because of the constant write activity, will end up wearing away, and there's ways they can get around it with controllers doing intelligent controlled wearing, where things are spread across the disk neatly and still maintain that 5-year warranty. But it has to be said that in terms of these drives, there's a very, very different understanding of endurance on them. The SN850 arrives with a mean time to failure, which again, we're not going to mean time between failure, which we're not going to focus on too much there. Basically, it's between failure between systems, and that's 1.7 million hours, with 1.8 million hours on the Firecuda. We're not going to focus too much on that. But what's really important is the drive writes per day, or data writes per day. And these figures that are measured in decimal place are incredibly important for the long term. What that decimal place means is, if, for example, you have a drive that's 1 terabyte and you add a DWPD rating of 0.5, that means that you can fill 0.5 or 50% of that drive of data per day in terms of how fast you can write onto it, and in terms of its lifespan over the 5 years. Now, they will measure this figure sometimes in TBW, terabytes written, but again, it's a lot easier to calculate it when you break it down to the data writes per day. And the SN850 series is rated at 0.3 data writes per day, with the Firecuda 530 rated at 0.7, more than double. Now, why is that important, and who is it important to? Well, it means that if your drive has got a DWPD rating of 0.7, and you're not going to be using it to 70% of its overall total capacity frequently every single day, that's going to mean that that drive's going to last all the more longer in its durability. And the durability isn't just about how long till the drive dies, it's about how long the drive will maintain optimal efficiency and optimal performance in its lifespan. Now, who constantly writes to drives all the time? Well, we can talk about streamers, we can talk about high-profile video editors who will be dealing on projects constantly while migrating completed projects over to an archive or maybe another backup afterwards. That means that there's going to be a constant rotation of data on these disks, which means the whole drive will probably be refreshed every day or so in terms of total capacity. And if you're dealing with 4K and 8K, all the more. And 0.7 data writes per day is going to be very, very compelling as an argument to go for this drive if you have a frequent turnover of data, particularly data centers as well that have a lot of that pass-through of data. And definitely, I hate seagulls. If you are utilizing drives like these for caching, with newer generation NASs around the corner that will almost certainly take advantage, as the CPU lanes permit, PCIe Gen 4 lanes, particularly in rack mount devices, and therefore the ability to take advantage of these higher speeds while still maintaining that high level of durability is going to be very, very important. And for me, those data writes per day, the rescue service, the E18, and that additional layered NAND is what puts the Firecuda 530 that pinch ahead of the WD Black here. Now, it has to be said, the WD Black SN850 is still a great drive. There is a reason it does so well in the market. There is a reason it has such a strong position in the world of gaming right now. And if you are looking for a single usage drive, you're looking at a drive for gaming on a lower level, not high level streaming, and certainly not if you're going to be utilizing it for constant editing and rewriting of large 4K or 8K projects, the SN850 is certainly the best value product of the two, and it's certainly the best one for home and prosumers. But I would argue from a professional capacity, I would argue from an endurance capacity certainly, and rotation of data, business users should really move towards the Firecuda 530. And if you are looking for a new drive for your latest gen gaming rig, then if you can get the 530, maybe towards it, because I think it's got a little bit more future proofing in terms of how long it's going to last, in terms of when you're going to continue with the data rotation and recycling on that drive. But this has been the Firecuda 530 versus the WD Black SN850 SN850. If you have enjoyed this video, do click like. If you want to learn more, click subscribe to take advantage of the free advice section over on NAS Compare. It's completely free. It's linked in the description. I'll help you with your data storage query, myself and Eddie. It's manned by 2 human beings. It's not run for profit. Just chuck an email in there. We'll get back to you and help you out with your data storage needs. And otherwise, stay tuned for the next video in our NVMe PCIe Gen 4 comparison series. I'll see you next time.